Well, hello there. Hey, my great friends in Florida sent this to me. If you can see it, it's bent exactly at 90 degrees, and it takes a AA battery in the back. It's an homage to Dali. It's a melting clock. It actually tells time. It's pretty cool. it's it's sitting there by itself. You just put it on any 90-degree angle lens. I thought that was really cool. That's the kind of stuff I like. You actually stand back and you look at it. It looks so incredibly impressive. Actually, a lot of people would ask me to talk about dreams, specifically the metaphysics thereof. I found it interesting. I took a quick glance. I mean, I know quite a bit about dreams, and how in-depth people would like me to go on discussing dreams, but I found it really abysmal that, of course, people talk about REM states and activation centers within the brain. But if you look on basically 90% of the websites, it's even way worse than I thought. They will actually not tell you anything about a dream. Descriptions, by the way, are not explanations, and what is descriptive is absolutely not in any way, shape, or form explicative. Here's a perfect example, and you'll find this across the board, like WebMD and Wiki and every other place that some say, what are dreams? You know, I mean, I have them every night. Most people do. And it's like, what is a dream? And you won't find an explanation anywhere. You'll get a whole lot of descriptions. Here's a perfect example, and they're all like this, basically. Dreams are mental imagery or activity that occurs when you sleep. Well, no duh. But that doesn't explain what a dream is. I find that interesting. People say, we don't know why people dream. Well, actually, the metaphysics of why human beings, of course animals do it too. We occasionally see little hamsters and squirrels twitching and, you know, running in their sleep. And there's countless videos like that of dogs and whatnot. And by the way, the word animal literally means to have a soul. The explanation, just like everything in nature, is divinely simple. If you go looking for a deep, deep answer to something that is extremely convoluted and ridiculous, like quantum is, for example, you know, you're barking up the wrong tree, because nature itself is extremely simplex, not necessarily simple. So let's get into it. And a lot of people wanted me to discuss this topic, and try to keep the analogy is kind of simple here, but when, of course, the mind is cut off, and unfortunately in English, the distinction between mind, brain, and consciousness is essentially non-existent as far as the denotation of these different terms. Mind, of course, we know what the brain is. Brain is just a big lump of cholesterol or lard that actually sits between our ears. By the way, this is the reason why people and I just had to go off track on this and mention this, and nobody talks about this, by the way. It's incredibly important. Did you know that essentially dementia and Alzheimer's, I think, didn't exist until, I can't remember, it was like the 1960s or the 1950s? You go look this up, by the way. The brain is a huge lump of lard, essentially. It's just cholesterol. And when people take things that lower their cholesterol, unintelligent people, which is about like 95 or 98% of the population, wow, my God, old Uncle Bob's got dementia. So, can I ask you a question about Uncle Bob there? Yes, please, go ahead. Was he taking cholesterol-lowering stuff? Why, how did you know that? Oh, Bob's been taking it for 30 years to lower his cholesterol. That's why Bob's got dementia or Alzheimer's. It's an interesting fact, by the way. The distinction in ancient Greek metaphysics and ancient Pali is extremely explicative in separating out mind from consciousness, sort of nous, sort of chitta, from existential consciousness. And the radio analogy is perfect. The mind, or the nous, or the chitta in these languages, is autonomous. It would be synonymous with the signal, which of course the signal is not in the radio. Consciousness is the consubstantiality of the signal and the radio. Of course, the radio, you don't actually, when you turn the radio on, you're not...
The temperature was 39 degrees.
You're not listening to the signal, you're listening to the interpretation of the signal by the radio. Analog digital converters, processing, the speaker, the bass, the treble, oh, so on and so forth. There's just on and on and on endlessly. That would be analogous to consciousness. Consciousness is that byproduct. Like white light would be nous, or mind or chitta, and white light through a blue filter would be blue consciousness, right? White light through a red filter would be red consciousness. In other words, it has a beginning in time, and it's the consubstantiality of two things, that being mind or spirit, and the resultant consciousness. I had to get into that before going into dreams. But when the mind is cut off, i.e. the nous, sort of the signal, from the energia, or the energy, and of course define energy in countless other videos. I want to get into that here. But when it's cut off from the waking body, the mind will make a body of its own. It gets bored. It's kind of like children. They do something bad, and you ground them. Whatever is their favorite thing to do is like, you grounded Bobby, and Bobby likes to ride his bike. Bobby cut off from that because he's a capricious little rugrat. Will think of something else to do, and maybe play cards. Who knows what Bobby's doing because he's grounded. The mind is no different than an unruly, capricious little kid. When you cut it off from that which it is used to and or enjoys, it will, of course, branch off into something else. The reason or the chain of causation for dreaming is extremely simple. Of course, dreams have been the impetus for countless, endless billions of poems, spawning on ideas of metaphysics, because, by the way, the Pali word is extremely accurate and highly descriptive of a body consciousness that you have, which of course is a mirage, but matter itself is a mirage. The body that we see in the bathroom mirror is a different type of mirage made up of matter, but the body consciousness, or the body mind that you have when you're in a dream state, you're walking around doing things, interacting with people. By the way, and this is where people get confused, and this is the nuance of genuine metaphysics, which you can actually go to a place that is actually not a place, because a place is a topos, or a place with a Cartesian coordinate, kind of like a GPS coordinate. You can actually go to a non-place place. I know that kind of sounds slightly nonsensical, but it is real, and I've been there many times, and interact with beings. And these are not machinations of REM sleep or a certain brainwave state. These are actually beings that you interact with, but everybody has experienced a unconscious body state that they have in a dream state, walking around doing things, whether that be nightmares or good, or flying in the air. Everybody loves the dreams, seemingly everybody, where they're flying in the air and everything is blissful and the wind is whipping past you. But the Pali word is called manomayakaya, which means mind-made body. Mano as in mentation. Mamo is the ancient Pali word for mentation. Mentation, body, kaya. Maya is an artifice. So it is a mind artifice body. Super, super metaphysically accurate. Manomaya kaya. I just wanted to mention that, by the way. Anyway, by the way, here's something else that nobody answers, and the answer for it is extremely simple. Most people can't remember their dreams unless it's a waking dream, or you just get out of a dream and you're able, while there's still a connection there, to remember what you dreamt, and later on in the day you'll realize that, or actually even just an hour afterwards, most of us will lose recollection of what the dream was about, or they might get the gist of it, remember the gist of it, but in the waking state, it's been completely cut off. And there is an avenue of working your way back where past life recollection exists, and it has nothing to do with dreams or making stuff up, where you can work your way back, but that's a matter for another discussion, and referring to theurgy and past life recollection, also to astral projection. But deep dream recollection is extremely hard because it's actually trans-consciousness. When we actually, once again, cut off the mind from the waking body, the body will make up, the mind will make up its own body, manomayakaya, for example, the ancient Pali metaphysically accurate term. And this would be akin to, say, if the radio were alive and sentient, or the signal makes it sentient, and consciousness is analogous to the broadcast, which comes out of the speaker. But the broadcast, once again, is not the signal. It's the interpolation of the signal, and it has a beginning of time and an end in time. When you actually turn the radio off, if we have the analogy of the sentient signal, which is absolutely everywhere and nowhere, and certainly not so in the radio, because I don't know if anybody on this earth is dumb enough to think that there's a signal in the radio, because there is no signal in the radio. There's no soul in the body, but that certainly is not me affirming the absence of the soul. Rather, the corporeal corpus, and water, of course, is the antenna for the manifestation of nous. And turning that off and putting it in a sleep state, because we still have a battery connected to this radio, kind of a near-perfect analogy, the radio analogy. So it is still have life in it, analogous, of course, in the unconscious state. You know, the body is still alive, barring, you know, some heart attack in the middle of the night due to old age or whatever, some sort of infirmment. The mind will make up its own body, and it will wander around, and this directed and amplified is what remote viewing is about, astral, there's all these different names for one and the same thing, remote viewing, astral projection, so on and so forth. The CIA discovered that there's actually a lot of credibility to this. They even made a funny little goofy, not so good movie about it. I think it was called Men Who Stare at Goats. Anyway, it was called Project Looking Glass, I believe. It went under a couple different names. One of them was Project Looking Glass, where they actually did conscious regression of remote viewing, wherein one a being was able to extract this consciousness from the body and actually direct it through great concentration to remote viewing. But I mean, that's what the mind is doing. These are unconscious. What are dreams? And keeping it really simple here, of course, dreams are unconscious desires and fears and fantasies. Here's the demonstrable fact. Whether you agree with me or not, doesn't matter to me at all, but it's a fact. The wiser you become, the less you will dream. I very, very rarely dream. The few times I do dream, and the last time it happened to me when I was really, really, really sick with the coof, you know, my mind was in disarray because my body was in a state of excessive suffering, obviously so. And I did have extremely vivid dreams then, but I almost never dream. And I'm not saying, wow, you know, I'm wise or nothing. I'm stating a fact that 99% of dreams are unconscious fears, desires, fantasies, so on and so forth. And the dream body that we project ourselves as, whatever we may do, you know, craziness where people dream, you know, that they don't have any clothes on and they're out in public. You know, that's an unconscious fear. It's like, you know, ashamed. Something horrible happens, which of course is a nightmare, obviously so, and people have endless dreams if they're ignorant due to their conscious desires and greeds and appetites, so on and so forth. This has inspired society, literature, science fiction, endlessly, of course, but I'm not interested in discussing that. We all know that, but dreams are just unconscious desires, fears, and fantasies. So the more wisdom you have, the less, far, far less, you will dream. Waking fears and desires, which of course is the modulation of mind and or consciousness. There is two different types of modulation. One is transcendent to the psychophysical body. That would be analogous to the signal, because the signal, of course, whether it's amplitude modulation or frequency modulation, is a modulation of the spirit or nous, or mind, and the Greek would be nous, or in Pali it would be chitta. We could say in Latin the spiritus sanctum, which is ab extra to the psychophysical body. Once again, just like a little kid, when you actually cut the consciousness off from its little portal of interacting with the universe, the objective, demonstrable Cartesian universe, it will make up its own little universe, because the fears and desires and impulses that actually drive people in the waking state are still present in the unconscious state. And unconscious is accurate, even though, unfortunately, in English there's no distinction between mind, brain, and consciousness. There is in Pali and Sanskrit. In an unconscious state where consciousness, i.e. the consubstantial output, which would be analogous to the broadcast, because what comes out of the speaker is not the same thing as the signal. Not at all. In unconsciousness, we still have mind, or nous. It has its own modulation, and as such, and by the way, this is what the definition of hell is, its own desires and fears and angers. Imagine a being that doesn't require air and food and water, and you're caught in a modulated state of perpetual agitation. You know, if someone is evil and highly agitated of spirit, i.e. nous sorcita, or in Latin, the spiritus sancta, then the same thing is going to happen when there is disunion between the body and the signal. Or it'd be analogous to the nature of the broadcast, which is modulated. Yeah? Say the modulation is a sentient modulation, kind of like the Terminator movies where the signal itself is sentient. You know, smash the radio, you know, you've ended the consubstantiality between spirit and mind, and of course the broadcast, the broadcast from the radio is over, yet the signal, of course, remains. You want a real definition of Dante's hell, this is it. It's kind of like a record skipping over and over and over and over again for not millennia, but many hundreds and sometimes thousands of years, because the fear, stress, anger, anxiety, lusts, and regrets, and on and on and on and on are still present, except you've actually broken the link between spirit and mind. Anyway, getting back to consciousness. So these waking fears and desires, modulation of the mind-brain, of mind and resultant consciousness as embodied, because consciousness is the embodiment of that signal as processed by the body, or as in the radio analogy, processed by the radio. Unconsciousness, of course, is still an awake mind. When you actually shut off using, applying the premise of a sentient signal, when you shut off consciousness or the broadcast, the mind is still awake, and it will create its own little reality. The metaphysics of dreams is actually hyperlogical and hyper-rational. It doesn't require any suspension of credulity, like, you know. True metaphysics always must necessitatively be hyper-rational and hyper-logical. Existential awareness, of course, like the broadcast of waking sentience or bodily sentience, or unconscious awareness, is no different than signal modulation tethered to the body when asleep. You can actually demodulate the consciousness in altered states. And I know why people, due to reason that I can't actually say because the algorithms are always listening, I know why people want to enter into an altered state by means of, I'll let you finish that sentence. I know why they do. They want to demodulate the consciousness from, it's like demodulating the signal out of the radio. It's actually an in-between point, and people, you know, have a waking awareness of things that actually broaden their consciousness. But there's ways to do that, to achieve these states that don't require A, B, C, X, Y, Z. I can't say those things. You know exactly what they are. People make a lot of assumptions about me because they see all these tattoos, thinking I do stuff like that, but I absolutely do not, and I never have. Don't let the tattoos confuse you. Anyway, demodulation of the consciousness in these altered states is kind of like detuning a radio. It's actually temporarily breaking the radio. And I know, once again, why people do it. And it's a poor man's way of getting there. And basically saying, I'm not smart enough to do this on my own and figure out how to do it, so I'm going to enter this state using A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And you know exactly what I'm referring to. This is no different than cross-band reception, while consciously sentient. And this is how we actually get into mediums. Like, what's a medium? Defocusing or demodulating the signal of existential consciousness, so you then, instead of being focused on, by, and through the existential body that I have or you have, it becomes a broadband receiver. I mean, what a medium actually is, a true medium, not the countless hucksters that are out there, is hyper-rational and hyper-logical, is a demodulated consciousness such that broadband reception can occur. We enter in this universe of intuition and symbolism. Mediums are just broad-spectrum receivers. There's a book written about how the ancients saw this across many cultures. You could download it or get it on Amazon. It's a great book, by the way. It's written by Julian Jaynes. It's called Breakdown of Consciousness. In the bicameral mind, the ancients thought that they were of two beings, and of course they were. And this is a correct way of looking at it. When they were actually talking to the gods, they were actually having conversations between, by, and through their existential self, i.e. existential consciousness, and their transcendent self, which is no different than the signal. It would be the sentient broadcast, for example, assuming that the radio is analogous to the body and the broadcast is analogous to waking consciousness. They'd actually be having conversations, intuitions, and pulling information out of the ether, which what people assume a real medium does, but they're just broad spectrum receivers. Anyway, the breakdown of consciousness in the bicameral mind talks about the ancient people communicating with their transcendent self, which is ab extra to the body. It is not the brain, and it is not existential consciousness. And actually, this is the accurate way of looking at it and what the ancients did. Many of the ancients. That's really the best book on this subject that I could recommend. It is a really, really good read. I think it's like in its fourth or fifth edition on that book. Then we get into, you take mediums further, we get into the area of divination and objects of mental focus. And by mental, I mean nous or citta or spiritus sanctum, not consciousness, but of mental focus to extract mind from the body. Get information. Edgar Casey referred to this as the Akashic Records. It goes by 100 different names. I don't care what names silly human beings ascribe to it. It's all one and the same thing. Okay? By the way, this state of trans-radio or trans-conscious perception in the ancient Pali is another brilliant word for it, and there's no perfect translation, but the word is dibakaku. Kaku is a reference to eye or vision. Dibba means heavenly or transcendent or ethereal or spiritual. So you could basically say spirit eye, transcendent eye, soul eye. It's a brilliant little word in ancient Pali. Heavenly eye or a nous vision, that we're actually able to see and understand things. I go into this state very, very frequently, not as much as I'd actually like to. And by the way, you can actually engage in, like to talk about time dilation here in a second, by using the nous and cause time dilation when you're in a certain state where you're contracted the mind from conscious embodiment, and you're able to time dilate in this undisturbed nous state or a spirit state, and the universe flies by while the mind actually shrinks. You can feel, and I've done this many, many, many times, and I've done it recently where I was so exhausted, go into this special state of time dilation by contracting the nous or mind, analogous to the signal, contracting it away from the psychophysical, that you actually have time dilation, and you'll be in there for like a half an hour. Time means nothing when you're in that place, because time, of course, doesn't exist at all except for masses and magnitudes. And when you're demagnituding it out, and I know that's not a word, demagnituding the nous out from the psychophysical body, you're actually able to time dilate the type of rest that you get. You could be in there for half an hour and come out and felt like you've had 8 or 9 or 10 hours of really, really good sleep. It's actually a brilliant thing to do. It actually takes about 25 minutes to get in there. You don't have to be there for half an hour, but it takes me between 25 or 30 minutes to get in there. But once you're in there, time completely vanishes, and when you come out, you're thinking it's like 9 or 10 a.m., and really it's only like 3 a.m. It's absolutely fascinating. Explaining how to get there is, it's not difficult. It's hyper-rational and hyper-logical. Anyway, getting back to altered states and dream states. Anyway, you go further from mediums, which are broad-spectrum receivers. You get into areas of divination and objects of mental focus. Anyway, there's fundamentally 4 different states of mind. There's either objective focus, which is a reference to conscious awareness of any typical living creature. And then there is a subjective focus, which is Platonic recollection. It's called mineme, or apophaticism, via negativa. So it is retroductive focus. There's objective focus, which is what most human beings on Earth do, 99.99% of them do, including animals and every other living creature. And then there is a subjective focus through objective negation. A medium, since a medium is a broad spectrum receiver, it is defocused from the body the same way an altered state person is able to go into that state by whatever means, and I don't want to discuss those means, whether by focus of the mind or by other things that I don't recommend, that I'm certainly not going to talk about, they basically become an EMF detector. I mean, what is a medium that has, other than to simply say that they have defocused from objective consciousness of their Cartesian psychophysical body? They become literally a broad spectrum EMF detector. They can feel and sense what's going on. They are, most of them, quite skittish, because if they get into that state, they actually become used to being in that state, and they become agitative to basically anyone and everything. It would be akin to you living in your house, and you got all your doors locked, and you're there with either yourself and or your family, versus, say, a homeless person who's living on the streets, and anyone and everyone can come up to you and bother you or take things from you or disturb you or worse things. And in such a state, it ages you rapidly, and this is why mediums are skittish. It's like, what actually defines a true medium, not these hucksters that are out there, and there's countless, endless medium hucksters, is that they are broad spectrum receivers. They've basically turned themselves away from objective focus. It depends on how some people are actually born that way and stay that way. Some people enter in the state of a medium, and when they're done wanting to do that, and that's a greater power, actually pull away from that and focus in on their objective self, i.e. Soul embodiment focus, rather than being a broad spectrum receiver. There's transcendence concentration, there's embodiment concentration, which is analogous to normal consciousness of any human being. There's disjointed consciousness, or what I'm referring to as altered states, through whatever means. I'm not going to discuss those. And there are states that refer to someone who is a medium. And this, of course, is someone that has broadband reception. But when you cut the mind off from the waking body, it will do and create its own monomyakaya, a mentation-made body, and it will go around and do things, and it will exhibit the same fears and desires and impulses and appetites that every other being has in this unconscious state. I could go on and on about this. I've actually droned on a little bit about this too much already. But ghosts are lost, of course, as a last note, in a dream state of mental modulation. You don't have to have a body, to have this mentation body. We have it in a dream state, and disembodied beings, since they don't have a body at all, hence they're disembodied beings, they exhibit the same thing. And the fears and the appetites and desires and the impulses, it has nothing to do with embodiment or life, because that exists in dream state, and it exists as for disembodied beings also, which, by the way, is a true definition of hell. Anyway, I think I've talked a bit too much already. Thank you so much for watching. If you ever want to make a donation, that is in the description below, or send me an email. Let me know. I read every comment. Have a happy rest of the Thanksgiving weekend.